Captain Budi Santoso flew the last flight to leave Indonesia's Palu airport before disaster struck. He sat in the cockpit of Flight 7142 on what looked like a normal evening in Palu. His passengers were ready. The sky was clear, and every instrument showed nothing unusual. Yet in the middle of this calm, he heard something no one else could. A whisper echoed in his mind, urgent and insistent, telling him to leave at once. Against all training and routine, he listened. Moments later, that decision saved 152 lives. But what was that voice? A product of instinct or something far beyond explanation? Santoso had flown for 17 years. Discipline was everything. He checked gauges twice, followed every protocol, never deviated. That's what made this evening so strange. As he sat in the Boeing 737-800, everything appeared normal. The 152 passengers were boarded. The sky over Palu stretched clear. Yet something felt wrong. Not the instruments, not the weather, something else. Then he heard it, not through the radio, but inside his head. A voice, clear as spoken words. Leave now. Don't wait. His hands tightened on the controls. Santoso wasn't superstitious. He believed in training, procedures, facts. But this voice carried urgency that made his pulse race. The flight was scheduled for 5:50 p.m. It was 5:47 p.m., 3 minutes early. In aviation, those minutes mattered. Taking off early was against protocol. Yet the voice persisted. Louder, more insistent. Santoso made his decision. Request immediate clearance, he told First Officer Dewey Kuzuma. She turned, surprised. Sir, we're 3 minutes ahead, I know. Request clearance anyway. Something in his tone stopped questions. She keyed the radio. Palu Tower, Garuda 7142, requesting immediate takeoff clearance. A young voice responded. Garuda 7142, you're early. Tower, requesting immediate clearance. Pause. Then, Garuda 7142, cleared for immediate takeoff. Santoso pushed the throttles forward without hesitation. Flight 7142 touched down at Manado's Sam Ratchalangi International Airport at 7:23 p.m., a smooth landing that drew light applause from a few passengers. Captain Santoso taxied to the gate with the same precision he'd shown for 17 years, but his hands felt numb on controls. First Officer Kuzuma handled shutdown checklist while Santoso pulled out his phone, dreading what he'd find. The news had already spread. Major earthquake and tsunami strikes Palu, screamed headlines. Death toll estimates ranged wildly. Hundreds confirmed dead. Thousands missing. Airport closed indefinitely. Runway destroyed. And buried in third paragraph of one article. Air traffic controllers missing after tower damaged in quake. Santoso's blood went cold. That young controller. Risky something. The one who'd granted their early clearance without hesitation, trusting an experienced captain's urgent request. Passengers filed off the aircraft, many checking phones, exclaiming as they discovered the magnitude of what they'd escaped. The young mother, sorry, stopped at cockpit door, her daughter asleep on her shoulder. Captain, thank you for getting us off early. I just read, we would have been... She couldn't finish. Tears filled her eyes. Santoso nodded, unable to speak. What could he say? That a voice in his head had saved them? That he couldn't explain his own actions? In the terminal, the 152 passengers of Flight 7142 scattered toward various destinations, most still processing how close they'd come to disaster. Journalist Ahmad Rahman was already on his phone with his editor, realizing he'd been aboard the last flight out before catastrophe. His travel blog post would become an international news story. Others called family, booking hotels, rearranging plans. Life continued for them, an alternate timeline where they existed instead of being statistics. Captain Santoso and First Officer Kuzuma were met by airline officials who'd rushed to airport. There would be debriefings, statements, investigations into early departure. The helicopter never came. At 2 a.m., word reached the rescue team that the military helicopter had developed mechanical issues. A backup was being sourced, but it would take hours more. Rizky Pratama sat with his back against the one wall that seemed most stable and conserve his energy. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. His body ached from tension of staying braced during aftershocks. His throat was raw from dust and shouting. But he was alive. The tower, incredibly, was still standing. Below, the rescue team maintained their vigil. They'd set up a rotation, some sleeping in shifts while others watched the structure, ready to respond if conditions changed. A medic had managed to throw up a first aid kit wrapped in a weighted bag, which Rizky caught. Basic supplies, but it included water and energy bars. He rationed carefully. Around 4 a.m., a particularly violent aftershock hit. Rizky felt the tower lurch in a way it hadn't before. A sickening sideways movement followed by grinding sound deep in structure. Something fundamental had given way. He scrambled to window. "It's going," he shouted down. "The towers go to collapse." The rescue team evacuated the immediate area, pulling back to safe distance. Rizky found himself alone again, this time with certainty that the building beneath him was in its final moments. But minutes passed, then an hour. The tower leaned at a more pronounced angle now, but it didn't fall. Engineers at dawn assessed that it was in critical condition, but some combination of steel reinforcement and luck was keeping it upright. The structure had twisted rather than collapsed, creating a new but precarious equilibrium. At 6:30 a.m., 10 hours after the earthquake, a new crane arrived, bigger, with longer reach. This one could do it. Rizky watched them set up with desperate hope. The basket extended, rising alongside tower, finally reaching broken window. A firefighter rode in basket, reaching out. "Come on, quickly." Rizky Pratama climbed into the basket, his legs shaking, his body weak from hours of tension and fear. They descended immediately. The moment his feet touched solid ground, his legs gave way. Medics caught him, easing him onto a stretcher. The pilot, Rizky mumbled as they loaded him into an ambulance. "Garuda 7142. Is the pilot okay?" "Sir, you need a rest." Tell Captain Santoso. I'm glad he trusted his instinct." Rizky spent 3 days in a Palu hospital that was itself damaged, operating on emergency generators and overcrowded with injured survivors. He'd suffered cracked ribs, severe dehydration, and respiratory issues from concrete dust, but he was alive. The story spread rapidly. The 22-year-old controller who'd stayed at his post to ensure a flight was clear, then survived 10 hours trapped in a collapsing tower. News crews arrived. Government officials visited. His face appeared on national television. Captain Budi Santoso flew back to Palu on the first relief flight allowed into the damaged airport. He found Rizky in the hospital, sitting up in bed, looking impossibly young and fragile. "You stayed," Santoso said simply. "You stayed in the tower for my flight." Rizky shrugged, wincing at movement. "Just doing my job, Captain. But I need to ask, why did you request early departure? What made you?" Santoso pulled up a chair. For the first time, he told the truth. "I heard a voice. I know how that sounds. But something told me we needed to leave immediately. I've never experienced anything like it." The young controller nodded slowly. "My grandmother says the ancestors watch over those who serve others. Maybe someone was watching over both of us that day." The final death toll from earthquake and tsunami exceeded 4,300. The city of Palu was devastated, requiring years of rebuilding. But Flight 7142's 152 passengers survived because a captain trusted an inexplicable instinct and a controller stayed at his post. The engines roared and Flight 7142 rolled down runway 15. Inside the cabin, passengers barely noticed the earliness. A mother adjusted her toddler's seatbelt. A businessman opened his laptop. A college student closed her eyes. They headed to Manado for 100 reasons: family, business, vacation, homecoming. None knew they were inside a miracle. In the cockpit, Captain Santoso's hands moved with precision, but his mind churned. Why had he heard that voice? Why had it felt so urgent? In 17 years, he'd never experienced this. Yet he'd acted. Broken protocol. Demanded early clearance. If nothing happened, there would be questions. Reports. Consequences. First Officer Kuzuma monitored instruments as they accelerated. V1. She called. The point of no return. The 737 couldn't abort safely now. They were committed. Rotate. Santoso pulled back. The nose lifted. The main gear left ground. Then nose gear. Flight 7142 was airborne, climbing in a clear sky over Palu at exactly 5:47 p.m. 3 minutes early. In the tower, 22-year-old air traffic controller Rizky Pratama watched the radar signature climb. The early departure was unusual, but something in Santoso's voice convinced him to grant clearance. He'd been a controller 14 months. He'd learned to trust experienced pilots. Now he turned to other traffic, unaware his life was about to intersect with history. Santoso guided the aircraft through initial climb. At 1,000 feet, tension in his shoulders eased. At 2,000 feet, he breathed. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he'd overreacted. Maybe the first tremor hit at 6:02 p.m., exactly 3 minutes after their actual departure. At first, subtle, vibration like turbulence. But through cockpit windows, Santoso saw something that stopped his heart. The ground below was moving. From 3,500 feet, Captain Santoso watched Palu transform into chaos. The earthquake struck with magnitude 7.5. From his aerial vantage, he saw the city convulse. Buildings swayed like grass. Roads split apart, cracks spreading like spiderwebs. Dust clouds rose from collapsing structures, obscuring neighborhoods in gray fog. But the runway made his blood run cold. The runway they'd lifted from 3 minutes ago was tearing apart. Long fractures raced across asphalt, creating gaps that would make takeoff impossible. If they'd waited for their 5:50 p.m. departure, they'd be taxiing into position right now. The earthquake would have caught them on ground, trapped on disintegrating runway, with 152 souls and no escape. The voice had been right. My God, First Officer Kuzuma whispered, staring at destruction. Santoso tried raising the tower. Palu Tower, Garuda 7142. Do you copy? Static. He tried again. Palu Tower, Garuda 7142, requesting status. Nothing. The silence was more terrifying than any response. In the cabin behind them, some passengers noticed unusual movements below. A few pressed faces to windows, pointing at dust clouds and strange patterns in earth. But most remained unaware, distracted by phones, books, conversations. Santoso maintained the climb, training taking over even as his mind reeled. Standard procedure. Continue to destination unless instructed otherwise. But every instinct screamed to know what was happening below, to confirm what his eyes showed. At 5,000 feet, the co-pilot spoke quietly. Sir, look at the bay. Santoso shifted his gaze to Palu Bay, and his stomach dropped. The water was behaving impossibly, pulling back from shoreline, exposing seabed in massive retreat. He'd heard of this in training, the precursor to something worse than earthquake itself. Tsunami, he said softly. Kuzuma's hand moved to her mouth. They knew what was coming. The ocean transformed before their eyes. From 6,000 feet, Captain Santoso and First Officer Kuzuma watched impossible physics unfold. The water that retreated now rushed back, but not as a single wall. Multiple waves formed simultaneously, radiating outward in concentric circles from the epicenter beneath the bay. These weren't rolling ocean swells. They were traveling walls of water, dark and fast, building height as they approached shallow shore. The first wave hit Palu's coastline with liquid avalanche force. From 6,000 feet, it looked almost graceful, a dark line spreading across the city's edge. But Santoso knew the reality. That line was a 20-foot wall traveling at highway speed, carrying the bay's weight behind it. Buildings along waterfront simply vanished as the wave swept over them. Then second wave hit, higher than first. Then third. The The bay's funnel shape concentrated tsunami energy into the city's heart, amplifying destructive power. Entire neighborhoods disappeared under brown water. Cars tumbled like toys. Port facilities crumbled and scattered. Santoso tried the radio again, cycling emergency frequencies. Any station, Garuda 7142, declaring emergency for Palu region. Magnitude 7.5 earthquake and tsunami in progress. Repeat, Palu struck by major earthquake and tsunami. A different voice crackled through, from a control center hundreds of miles away. Garuda 7142, copied. Continue to Manado. We're coordinating emergency response. Understood. Continuing to Manado. But Santoso couldn't look away from destruction below. His city, he'd been based in Palu 5 years, was drowning. Friends lived there. Fellow pilots. Ground crew families. And somewhere in that chaos, the controller who cleared him for early takeoff was still in the tower. Or had been. In cabin, more passengers noticed now. Strange ocean movements. Dust clouds. Coastal areas looking wrong. A flight attendant approached cockpit. Captain, passengers are asking questions. While Flight 7142 climbed to safety, Rizky Pratama fought for his life in the Palu control tower. The 22-year-old controller had been on duty 6 hours, guiding aircraft through one of Indonesia's busier regional airports. Routine work, the kind he trained for at Jakarta ATC Academy. Nothing prepared him for this. The earthquake hit like a hammer. The 4-story tower swayed, so violently Rizky was thrown against his console. The floor beneath him rippled like water. Ceiling tiles exploded downward, raining debris. Windows along the observation level shattered in sequence, each glass explosion adding to chaos. Evacuate. Everyone out. The senior controller, Hassan with 20 years' experience, was already moving toward the stairwell. The other 3 controllers on duty followed immediately, training overriding panic. In an earthquake, you get to ground level. You get out. You run. But Rizky's eyes went to his radar screen. Garuda 7142 was still climbing through 4,000 feet, still technically in his airspace. The flight was in critical phase. If they encountered problems, needed to return, faced any emergency, he was their contact point. The tower shook again, harder. An aftershock, or the main quake intensifying. Metal support beams groaned with stress. Concrete dust filled the air. Pratama, move! Hassan screamed from the stairwell. Rizky's hand hovered over his console. Every instinct demanded he run. But his training said something else. A controller doesn't abandon aircraft in their airspace. A controller stays until handoff is complete. Go! Rizky shouted back. I need to make sure 7,142 is clear. The building is collapsing. Then go. I'll be right behind you. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Hassan hesitated one agonizing second. Then the tower lurched and survival won. He disappeared down the stairwell. Rizky was alone. Rizky Pratama kept his eyes locked on the radar screen as his world disintegrated. The tower swayed with each aftershock, tilting at angles that defied physics and survival. His chair had rolled away, so he stood at the console, one hand gripping the edge for balance, the other hovering over the radio transmit button. Flight 7142 climbed through 6,000 feet. Nearly clear. The radio crackled. Palu Tower, Garuda 7142, do you copy? Captain Santoso's voice carried urgency, but also hope. Hope that someone was still there, still responding, still maintaining order in chaos. Rizky pressed the transmit button, his voice remarkably steady despite terror coursing through him. Garuda 7142, Palu Tower. Continue climb to flight level 250. Contact Macassar Control on 124.7. Safe flight. A pause. Then Palu Tower. Are you... Switch frequencies now, 7142. Go. Rizky released the button. The handoff was complete. Flight 7142 was officially out of his airspace, now under Macassar Control's jurisdiction, 200 miles away. His duty was fulfilled. The aircraft and its 152 passengers were safe. Now he could run. He turned toward the stairwell, and his heart sank. Where stairs should be, there was only rubble. The entire stairwell had collapsed during the last major shake, leaving a pile of concrete and twisted rebar blocking the only normal exit. The emergency ladder was on the opposite side, accessible through a door now buried under fallen ceiling panels and broken equipment. Risky was trapped, 4 stories up in a swaying tower moments from complete failure. His radio console flickered and died. Lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, casting everything in dim red light that made the scene even more nightmarish. Through broken windows, he heard screaming from ground below. The airport was in chaos, ground crew running, vehicles abandoned, people fleeing toward open space away from buildings. At 7,500 feet, the cabin of Flight 7142 had settled into comfortable routine of a short domestic flight. The seatbelt sign had been turned off. Flight attendants moved through aisles with beverage cart. Children played games on tablets. Business travelers typed on laptops. None understood they were flying through the aftermath of a miracle. Captain Santoso had made an announcement explaining they'd witnessed an earthquake and tsunami, asking passengers to keep Palu in their thoughts and prayers. But from 7,500 feet, destruction looked almost abstract, like watching a disaster movie on a distant screen. The human mind struggles to process catastrophe from altitude. Those dust clouds could be construction. Those strange water patterns could be boats or currents. The brain rejects horror when it's too far away to feel real. A woman in seat 14C scrolled through her phone, annoyed she couldn't get signal to check if her Monado meeting was still scheduled. A man in 22A worried about his connecting flight. A teenager in 8F texted her boyfriend that the flight was boring. In seat 31B, a young mother named Sari held her 3-year-old daughter, who'd been fussy during boarding. The early takeoff had actually helped. They'd gotten airborne before the child's restlessness turned into full tantrum. Sari had been grateful for the captain's decision to leave a few minutes early. She had no idea it saved their lives. In business class, journalist Ahmad Rahman typed notes on his laptop about a story he was chasing in Monado. He'd noticed the earthquake below, even taken photos through the window. Good content for social media. Dramatic background for his travel blog. He didn't yet know he was sitting inside the biggest story of his career. First Officer Kuzuma handled routine communications with Macassar control, while Captain Santoso flew with mechanical precision. But his mind was elsewhere, back in that tower, wondering about the young controller who'd cleared them. Risky Pratama explored every corner of the control tower's top level, searching desperately for an escape route. The main stairwell collapsed. The emergency ladder blocked. The windows, too high to jump without fatal injury. He was well and truly trapped. The aftershocks continued, each one sending new cracks spiderwebbing across walls. Dust rained continuously from damaged ceiling. The structure groaned and creaked, sounds suggesting imminent collapse. But it held. Somehow, impossibly it held. Through shattered windows, Rizky could see devastation spreading across Palu. The tsunami waves had receded, leaving behind a waterscape of destruction. Entire buildings were gone, leaving only foundations. Cars rested on rooftops. Ships sat in middle of streets. The death toll would be staggering. He checked his phone again. Still no signal. The city cell towers were likely down, destroyed by earthquake or tsunami or both. He was isolated not just physically but communicatively, unable to tell anyone he was alive, unable to call for help, unable to do anything but wait. Time became elastic. Minutes felt like hours. He found an emergency first aid kit and drank from a small water bottle, rationing carefully. No telling how long he'd be trapped. He wrapped a cloth around his face to filter concrete dust that filled the air. And he waited. Below, emergency response was beginning. He could see fire trucks arriving, ambulances, police vehicles. But they were focused on immediate survivors, people trapped in collapsed buildings, injured in streets, drowning in flooded areas. A man trapped in a damaged but still standing control tower wasn't the priority. He understood that, accepted it, but understanding didn't make it less terrifying. Around 8 p.m., he heard voices below, shouting. Someone had noticed the tower, noticed it was damaged but not collapsed. Hope surged. Up here. Risky screamed through broken window. Fourth floor. I am trapped. The rescue attempt began in earnest around 9:30 p.m., nearly 3.5 hours after the earthquake. A proper rescue team arrived. Firefighters with equipment, engineers to assess structural integrity, medics standing by. Risky watched from above as they set up lights and equipment. Hope and fear warring in his chest. A firefighter with climbing gear approached the tower, testing handholds, evaluating external structure. But the building was too damaged, concrete too unstable. Every handhold crumbled. Every foothold threatened to give way. They tried the internal stairwell next, working to clear rubble that blocked it. But each piece of debris they removed caused shifts in remaining structure. The tower groaned ominously. An engineer called halt. Clearing stairs might trigger total collapse. Risky could see frustration in their movements, their gestures. They were so close, but physics defeated them. The building was a house of cards, one wrong move from total failure. Around 11 p.m., they brought in a mobile crane with extended boom. This was the answer. They could position the crane's basket at broken window, and Risky could climb aboard. Simple, direct, safe. The crane extended upward, its boom reaching, and then stopping 15 feet short. The tower's unstable foundation made it too dangerous to position the crane close enough. The operator tried different angles, different positions, but the mathematics of reach versus safety never quite worked. Another aftershock sent everyone scrambling away from tower again. Risky pressed himself against an interior wall, praying to every deity he could name. The structure swayed, pieces of ceiling fell, but the core held. When shaking stopped, he looked out to see rescue team regrouping. They weren't giving up. A new plan emerged around midnight. A helicopter. They bring in a helicopter from a military base in Monado, hover next to tower, and extract him that way. But the helicopter was 200 miles away. Hold on. A firefighter shouted through megaphone. Helicopter is coming. 2 hours. Just hold on.